When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. And I will make my covenant between me and you, and will make you exceedingly numerous. Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, As for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be the ancestor of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the ancestor of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and your offspring after you, throughout their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you. God said to Abraham, As for Sarah your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall give rise to nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her.
Isn't it interesting that there actually is a difference between the human timeline and God's timeline? Isn't it interesting that many of us would be very content to control the human timeline and not turn it over to God's time? This is exactly what Abraham is struggling with. For the third time, he hears God articulate the promise made to him so many years before. He hears the promise for the first time as he leaves his home and goes off to Canaan. He hears the promise again when he departs from Egypt. And here the third time, just moments before the birth of Ishmael and of Isaac. But why did Abraham have to hear this promise articulated by God so many times? During the course of these last chapters, what we see is Abram taking his family from here to there. He seems to be wandering without a place to anchor, without a place to call home. But something is different in this story. For the first time, he hears the actual name that God has given to him, Abraham, and to his wife, Sarah. Letting go of his need to control his own time, his own agenda, and turning it over to God. I remember before I went to seminary, I had about 10 or 11 months before actually starting to go to school. And so I gave up my job at SeaWorld because I knew that God would provide me a wonderful job, something that would prepare me for my theological studies, where I might engage with some significant pastoral work, get some good experience under my belt. So I made this decision in faith. I quit my job, had a month's income in the bank, but God would provide. And so I sat in my apartment waiting for the phone to ring, but it didn't ring. I hadn't filled out an application. But in my naivete, I believed that I had made a faith decision and that God would provide. And so I became angry with God. Why did you abandon me, God? I had done this for you, after all. Well, I grew up a little bit, and I began to fill out some applications, but nothing came of those. Nothing wonderful, nothing that would give me good, solid experience before starting seminary. And then in those last days of that month, where I had a little bit of money still in the bank, something happened. Now, I wish I had the appropriate words to share. I don't, but that's what often is true with miracles. Something happened within me where I understood that I had no right to be angry, but that God had been faithful to me and had never abandoned me. So there I was, letting go of my need to control a human agenda, my agenda, and giving it over to God. In this case, the phone did ring, and I was able to engage with 9 or 10 months of good counseling experience with some gang kids in San Diego. But that really isn't the point of this story. It was the good news that I experienced a miracle and learned about turning it over to God. Not that I have that lesson down pat, believe me, I don't. But there was a moment of grace so many years ago that I've never forgotten. So what was Abraham waiting for as he wandered from here to there? But perhaps that's not the right question. We should ask, what was God waiting for? It seems that God was waiting for Abraham to grow up, to finally understand he needed to let go of his own needs, his own agendas, his own way of interpreting what God had intended, and to simply surrender into God's mercy and will. The miracle is that he heard something different. Abram, exalted father, finally heard the name God had chosen for him, Abraham, father of all nations. And Sarai, the ruler, the law, was able to hear her name, Sarah, princess. What a wonderful invitation that we are given this Lent, to sit back, to let go, to be open, and to hear what exactly is the name that God has chosen for us. Have we found ourselves tired of wandering in the wilderness? Are we willing to listen to the voice of God call us by our name and then respond? So here's the promise. If you listen and if you hear, you will see and feel God's love and mercy, forgiveness and blessing. For that is the promise of God to each one of us.